Hello.
Hey, Maura, how are you?
I'm super good. I'm super good. I have a new mic, so if anyone thinks I sound better, let me know. And again, if you're out there on the live, say hi, tell us where you're calling from, tell us how old you are. Just
Yeah,
kidding.
right.
Feel free to tell us how old you are.
Yeah, tell us if you're young, old, in the middle, anything, and we definitely this is a really fun topic. I got to tell you that it's come up quite a bit in my work,
Mm,
because I do tend to work with mostly leaders in more Gen X, but as time goes on, you start seeing more leaders in millennials and Gen Z as well, and so I'm glad we chose this topic, and I hopefully we'll be able to get some questions going in the comment section as well today.
yeah. So I'm going to just start with just a couple of statistics that I think I found interesting, and start by saying I'm 46 and I will be 47 on August 26th.
All
So I
right.
guess I'm really 47. Firm in the middle of Gen X, at the younger end of Gen X, I
Mhm.
think. And for many years at Women Online, my company, AARP was our biggest client. And AARP is an amazing organization. I think a lot of people, we joke about getting the card and blah, 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 but like it's the largest advocacy organization in the country and probably in the world. And like many things, having to really rethink what it stands for in this new world.
Yeah.
When 50 is like Cameron Diaz is over 50. I mean,
Right. Yeah.
and 50 is not what 50 used to be. And but ARP does a lot of research, and they found that 3/4 of workers over 45 experienced age discrimination.
Mm.
And it's very prevalent, and it's worst, unsurprisingly, in tech and media industries, which is where I come from.
Uh-huh.
So I just wanted to sort of frame it up. But, age discrimination towards older people, very, very real. And age discrimination towards younger people, not in tech and media, but in
Hmm.
other fields, is also very real.
Yeah, for sure. I was thinking about that too, that we were framing this around discrimination against older workers. But in fact, as I was looking at stuff too, it is interesting that there's also a lot of that kind of bias that younger workers feel as well. And the tech and media thing, I guess it's not surprising. I wonder, is it because of one, the having to ramp up the learning curve of technology, but also, is it appearance based? Is it the fact that maybe in media, I guess it depends on really where, if you're kind of camera facing or not. But I was thinking how much of this is also related to just our own biases around visual, like, because usually we can't always tell how old somebody is.
It's interesting about the visual. I think that in tech, we obviously have this stereotype that younger people know more about technology.
Right.
And that is true in terms of, the sort of hard sciences behind engineering. And it's very true. So I come more from the content and marketing side. And I would want to scream every day because people would always think that the best content and social media strategists and marketers were super young because they're
Mm,
on TikTok, like they
right.
get it. And I would always say, they may be great on TikTok, but like this is your brand you're putting in their hands, you know?
Mhm.
So I think it's a lot of our youth obsession, certainly in America, our sense that youth are cooler, they know more, they're going to be,
Mhm.
the ones out there driving change. And that maybe also because innovation in computer science is evolving so fast, like younger people are, I don't know.
That's right. Yeah. No, it's so true. I mean, the fact that you have 16-year-old coders out there who are building businesses,
Yeah.
What's interesting is that I actually came across Peter Capelli, who's at Wharton,
Hmm.
a professor that I didn't get a chance to take a class from, but I know a lot about his work. He actually did some work on this topic, and one thing that I saw in an article he wrote was there are actually some myths or reasons why people have biases against older workers.
Mm.
And I'll just say them for you here. One is that the belief often is that older workers are counting the days until retirement. So they're
Mm,
not going to be as engaged if they're looking for a job. Older workers don't have today's skills, which is something that you've talked about as well compared to younger workers, but also that older workers won't necessarily want to report to younger managers.
mm,
And this was also interesting. Older workers only accept higher salaries.
mm.
These are myths. They're not necessarily backed by evidence, but it kind of creates the bias that a lot of people might have around, do I really want to hire an older worker for a role that I'm looking for?
Let me play devil's advocate with you. Why wouldn't an older worker accept only a higher salary?
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, and I think the belief is that, again, this goes back to what organizations have to think about is like, what are you paying for? You know,
Yeah.
is it really worth trying to lowball somebody when you really want to get the experience that they bring to the table? And I wondered about this topic also as it relates to both sides of the table. Do organizations do a good job of being open enough about how they're dealing with bias? Are candidates also doing enough of a job of going after opportunities, even if they feel that they're too old? And if they are going in those opportunities, are they showing enough adaptability, enough curiosity, enthusiasm?
Mm.
For instance, if I'm coaching an executive with like 30 years of experience, maybe they are coming into a situation where they're thinking, why do I have to kind of adapt? Why do I have to prove myself? I've done all this. Whereas the younger candidate might be much more of a, wow, big, blue sky and really enthusiastic and exciting. And so it is very, very different in terms of ways that people approach these issues.
I think
Um,
there's also, I want to ask you a question in a minute, but I think there's also a perception that people, certainly in the middle of their life, what we hope is the middle of our lives, have lots of other outside commitments, and that they
yes.
might not be willing to dedicate 18 hours a day to a job in the way that someone who theoretically is younger might. Again, I think that's a stereotype. I
Hmm.
love to tell people that I had my babies and I worked,
Hmm.
I mean, for me, I was a mom who, actually found when I had children, I actually loved working. You never
Hmm.
hear that story. It's always that's the total bias is that when you have little kids, you're sort of checking out, and that we know that really hurts women
Yes.
in terms of pay and advancement, and that's a myth. That's not
Hmm.
true for everyone, and so I wonder if that's also, and also we're seeing data about millennials and younger millennials and Gen Z not wanting to put in the hours. I
I
mean, they
know.
are totally not willing to put up with the shit that we put up with.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. They have a whole new vision of what it's like to. I just had this conversation recently with a client where they're starting to see people leaving their jobs without a job in hand.
Even in
And
this economy.
yeah, because
Wow.
they're thinking, well, they're reassessing in some ways, what is their real sense of purpose. And he and I both are Gen Xers, and we were talking about how, like, I don't think I could ever do that because I'm just conditioned to look for security and kind of work
Yeah.
my way up, right? Whereas a lot of the younger generation is just more optimistic. Now we'll see if they'll get their comeuppance at some point, but they just have a general, I guess, broader view and optimism around how to find fulfillment in the career.
Mm. Forgot to turn my phone off, sorry. Okay, well, let's get practical.
Yep.
And listeners, if you wanna chime in with a question, tell us where you're at, we'd love to hear from you. We wanna talk about a question of, "Am I too old for this job?" And I'm curious if you have a framework that
Mm,
you might offer if you were coaching someone who, wanted to make a transition and wondered, am I too old either because I worry I'm not gonna get hired, or am I too old to work?
right.
Am I too set in my ways to work in a job like this?
Yeah, I think you're touching on two really great points of a potential framework, which is thinking about the context that they're entering into, and how they will be perceived, whether that's too old compared to the criteria of the role. But then there's the internal part of it, which is that why do you want the role, and and let's think about that, because some people might be looking for another job because they are not sure what they want to do next.
Mhm.
And that might not be as compelling a case as a candidate as someone who really is, driven to be in that company or be in that role. And so, if I was coaching somebody who is a little bit older towards the latter part of their career, who is looking for a new role somewhere, I would probably encourage them to think about, is this really aligned with your values still? Is this a
Mm,
lot, are you willing to kind of put in the work to grow? Because that's really a big part of developing it within an organization. And if you are, then let's find a way to demonstrate that along with what you're really bringing to the table.
mm,
And then with respect to kind of, are you too old for their own perception? I would say, look out for some of the red flags out there, like the job description, for instance. What's the wording on that? Do you get any kind of clues on the culture that they'll have? Any clues on, and do a little bit of LinkedIn searching and see who else works there, and what kind of what can you kind of surmise around the level of experience that people in your role or around you in that role would have? Are you going to be surrounded by a lot of folks that are just right out of school? Are you going to be surrounded by other folks that are potentially late career? And
mm.
and see if you can kind of get a sense for. I'm a big believer in maybe networking with some of those folks to understand what life is like in that company, and really kind of design your pitch in a way that's going to be amenable, I think, to them being able to see, like, we could see you fitting in here.
What are some of those code words you might wanna look out for?
So I think things like, digital, for example, if you're looking for someone who's purely tech oriented and digital, focused, is there a big kind of emphasis on, social media, or being savvy around, some of the more, I don't know, I can't think of any words offhand, but I would say, even like, excited, enthusiastic, as opposed to maybe technical skills. I think it'd be interesting to see if there's a certain tone that's in these job descriptions that relates a little bit to the culture
Dynamic,
dynamic.
entrepreneurial.
hmm and I think, again, the other interesting factor here is the nature of the company and where they're going.
Right.
So, for instance, if you're a startup that really is looking for, growth, if you are a late stage startup that's looking to IPO, for instance, maybe they're looking. One of the clients that I work with is a company that was a startup and then IPO'd. They are in that right position where they actually want more older people to come in to kind of be the parent, if you will, to kind of.
The adults in the room. Wasn't Sheryl Sandberg hired to be the adult in the room?
Exactly that. So that's where, that could be your advantage. You could actually come in being the much more mature voice
Yeah.
among a lot of early career folks who are really good when it was scrappy, but now need a little bit of direction and kind of maturity, right? So that's another area where I would say, think about where you can play to your strengths, and make those decisions around your job search, I think, accordingly.
That's so interesting, and you remind me, one of my very first jobs in the first dot-com boom was at a company that had IPO'd and, really, and brought in an incredibly, my boss, Betty Hudson, incredible woman. She was, I think, head of corp comms at NBC. I mean, she was so
Mm,
experienced, and, it was, she said, "I'm the senior vice president." She would joke, but there really was that sense that, like, we're ready for talent that we can finally afford.
mhm.
And I think that's super interesting to look at the growth stage. Um, any other clues that maybe, like who their board is, or what
Yeah.
their strategic plan looks like?
Definitely. I think so. You're touching on an important part, which is, who are the stakeholders that are, have the most influence here. Um, I think looking at the website, looking at the leadership team,
Mhm,
looking at where they came from, for instance. Uh, Sometimes I think, again, looking at more private companies, you oftentimes will have a much older board that is overseeing. They might come
mhm.
from VC firms, or they might come from just appointments, but they tend to be an area where, if you're an older candidate, could you actually get to know those folks and really show your value, that where you could help. Um, and then I think also in the interview process, I think when you are in those positions where you're being asked questions about your experience, I would really encourage candidates to think about how do you make it kind of like an exciting opportunity for them to bring you on board, you
Hmm.
know? And I'm not generalizing that like the older you are, the less enthusiastic you are, but I do think that there is a certain freshness that comes from, younger career candidates just by nature of them not having really, done a lot beforehand and really kind of putting all their eggs into this one basket. I think there's a way to think about how do you, I look back, it's almost similar to any kind of sales meeting.
Hmm.
How do you really make them buy you, not just the experience you're bringing? Can they see themselves wanting to just kind of learn from you and to hang out with you, and that you're also going to be willing to learn from them?
I love that. And I should say actually when you're interviewing for the kind of role that your network could be powerful, like a sales job,
Hmm.
I think it's really appropriate to highlight the relationships you're bringing.
Yes.
I've also though run into recently a sort of bias that I might expect to be in charge because of my age and seniority,
Mm,
and that's not appropriate for the role that I'm interviewing for, and sort of like,
mhm.
are you okay? Like, are you willing to do
Right.
that? Which is frustrating. I have to, I'm just gonna, this is like so honest and raw, but I, as I've shared, have been sort of experimenting with like, what am I going to do next with my life after selling my company and trying to do workplace mental health full time. But I've been applying for jobs here and there, almost like an experiment, because I've been an entrepreneur for 17 years,
Hmm.
and I have applied for some jobs online that were definitely like below the skill set level that I have, and have never got a single email back,
Mm,
nothing.
hmm.
And I just was named, shortlisted for the Thinkers 50,
That's
like,
right.
Distinguished Achievement and Leadership Award, so, like, my career on that end is going gangbusters, but
Oh yeah.
it's so funny because thank you. But if I were to look at what it feels like to apply for jobs right off LinkedIn, which I've done a few times, bubkiss,
Hmm.
crickets.
Hmm. Is it? Do you think?
And
Do you think that there's the overqualified component there?
I don't know. I mean, it's probably not getting even past an AI screening. I'm curious what you
Hmm.
think. It's absolutely the most, and I've had other friends do that, especially friends who've been sort of on their own and coming back into a more corporate structure, where
Yeah.
it's like, I don't even know what level I'd be at, what would I be placed at, and really
Yeah.
feeling almost humiliated
Hmm.
that their real life experience is not acknowledged in the job search.
Yeah, yeah. This is an unfortunate stereotype, I think, that we fall victim to, when we are already experienced and qualified. Um, and the what I think is happening, again, I'm generalizing here, but I think having been internal in organizations and done talent development and succession
Mm,
planning, I think what happens is at the very bottom of the pyramid, you have much more people that you have the roles that you have to fill. Obviously,
mhm,
there's much fewer roles at the top, and a big part of what I think organizations want to make sure they are able to do is kind of build the culture from within.
mm,
And if you're coming in kind of here, like a level below the C-suite, or even at the C-suite, there's a lot more likelihood that you could be the outlier than if you build up from here, right?
mm.
And so I wonder if organizations are more willing to bet on somebody who doesn't have the qualifications, but we can build them up,
Yep,
right? That actually
yep,
have somebody who's going to bring in a certain amount of skill sets, but what if they're actually too stubborn or too fixed in their mindset? And what if they actually end up leaving because they
right.
actually don't want to stick it out for the next 10 years? You know, that could be a potential factor as well.
Can you teach adaptability to clients? How do I signal that I'm adaptable?
Oh, I think it's really in the evidence of it.
Yeah.
I think it's really in the behavior. Like, are you actually demonstrating behavior of admitting when you're wrong, changing your mind, for instance? I oftentimes will tell clients, like, you got to choose the battles. Marcia Goldsmith talks about this all the time. Like, one of the biggest flaws that senior leaders may have is that they win too much. They actually look to win all the time, and that might be fine when you are working on like a project or a problem that has an answer to it. But
Mhm.
in leadership, you can't be the one that's always winning. You got to let other people win. to build trust, to show that you're willing to kind of be a partner to them. And so I think adaptability is really around, finding those moments to show that, like, oh, okay, I'm willing to go the way you want to go, even if
Yeah.
I might disagree with it.
So you could highlight that in an interview by talking about a time when you disagreed with a team member, but let them run with it and it was the
Yes.
right idea, right? Something like
Absolutely.
that.
Yeah, because Jeff Bezos, for instance, talks a lot about the disagree and commit philosophy that he had at Amazon, where the idea here was that we can disagree, but at some point we have to also move forward. And so somebody's going to win, somebody's going to lose. And probably one of the most common themes we talk about in executive coaching is that as you move up, there's the trade-offs become bigger. Like, my division is going to have to sacrifice something for your division in order for us to both get there. And so being willing to say, I can be right here, but I can also be wrong here and still commit to what you want to do is a huge part of, I think, being a team player. It's unpleasant, but I think it sends the message in an interview, for instance, that I'm not going to be just fixed in my own view, no matter how much I bring to the table before I join.
I love that. What are some other examples you could pull up that signal adaptability and sort of a willingness to be humble while
Yeah,
still being
I think
competent, right? Because there's that, you have to show that double edge.
absolutely. I think that, and I was having this conversation with a client this morning about this, where he's an older executive also looking for a job, and he came into these interviews talking about all the skills he can bring, and he wasn't really kind of putting an emphasis on his leadership skills.
Mm,
And so the ability to build trust and motivate and inspire people. And so one of the things we talked about was his storytelling, that you have to really think about the arc of that you can bring people along with you to share with them how this was a difficult situation for you perhaps to admit that you were wrong, or to maybe take the perspective of a junior member on your team. And, to really bring it to life, you want to talk about how, normally people don't really defer to their junior employee. We don't actually do reverse mentoring where I'm going to be mentored by someone 10 years younger than me. But guess what? In this situation, I realized that I was the one who had the blind spot.
yeah.
And so what I did was I actually learned from them, and here's how it played out. So I think part of it is also creating those stories that, one of the parts is actually you have to do it. So you do have to actually, be a little bit humble, right? But then I think you have to also develop the story that shows people how much of it out of your comfort zone you went to really show that you can do it. And I think that's probably another area that can be quite attractive to employers, is that, you've lived a long life, you're 50, 55 years old, whatever, you had a great experience, but are you still willing to get out of your comfort zone? Okay, that's attractive to me, because that's something that we can work with then.
I love that. And I think also showing that example of when I didn't know the answer, I had Jeff Doing on my podcast last week, who is the CEO of about a $70 million company that does facilities management in the UK. And the linchpin of his sort of leadership journey was during COVID. They serviced restaurants, so they lost like all their business when
Mm,
restaurants closed. And he had a little bit of a breakdown, and he was in a board meeting with senior leadership trying to figure out what are we going to do? We have no business. Like, literally, there are no restaurants operating. And he said, for the first time in his life, he said, I don't know. I
wow.
don't know what we should do. And
Hmm.
his leadership team said, Jeff, you need to go and you need to rest. We're going to figure this out.
Mm,
And he let them do that. He left, checked out for just a couple days, and let them make the decision and come
wow.
back and ask and say, we recommend you do this. And he could say yay or nay. And he said in that moment, his team became giants.
Mm,
And I think that's a risky move, right? And it was his business. But what an incredible example of
yes.
leadership
Yeah.
and vulnerability,
Yeah.
but also what an incredible example of building such an amazing team,
Yes.
that didn't essentially always need him. That's risky, but that just came into my mind.
It was such a powerful example, because I think you're touching on another interesting thing, which is we always talk about how leaders should empower their team to do more and step up. But if you don't get out of the way, You'll never know whether they will.
Totally.
And so he did that, right? And that, I'm sure, like you said, took vulnerability, took humility, took, maybe it was painful to just admit, but
Mhm.
actually that, then on the other side of it, now he's probably seen evidence now that his team is actually on a whole nother level of potential that he was never able to really kind of fulfill.
Yeah. Yeah. I think also probably it's really important to balance the soft skills and the leadership skills with, if you're interviewing for a revenue generating role or a
Hmm.
line, sorry, P&L role, you know, the way that you're experiencing your network can lead to multiplication of revenue.
Hmm.
It's probably a little bit harder when you're interviewing for a very senior role in a non-revenue generating capacity, or in something that um, maybe all those years of experience aren't going to make the ka-ching happen as much.
Yes, it's a great point. How do you measure success in the role, and can you really demonstrate that evidence pretty early? Absolutely, like you said, if you're coming into a revenue generating role, there's probably more likelihood that you can say I'm either succeeding or failing.
Yeah.
And when you're coming in as a leadership role internally with a function, for instance, uh, and I do think that there's actually in those situations, the second example, there's a lot more room, unfortunately, for misunderstanding,
Mm,
and there's a lot more room for over underestimating people's efforts and potential. I oftentimes will work with executives that come in, and despite their best intentions, they're inheriting a lot of dysfunction from before them. But
mhm.
it's easy to blame the new leader because, hey, you're in the role and you should take accountability. But they're not able to kind of go ahead and cut 4 more deals to prove that, hey, I'm still bringing in value. So that's another interesting point you make. Um, are you coming in as an older candidate, for instance, without the benefit of having grown up there, and now you feel like there's an allergy to you
Yep.
bringing in more value?
Or Linda, is it Linda Yaccarino, the new CEO of Twitter X?
Yes.
I mean, she's
Yes.
totally been brought in to fail, and
Exactly.
her hands are tied. She can't. She's famous for making ad deals. She's not allowed to make them.
Hmm.
To me, she was literally brought in to fail.
Well, and that's such a great point too. It's like, be careful what you wish for, you know? Just because you're coming in as with a new job as an experienced person, are you being fully respected for the value that you could bring?
Yeah.
Because all of us have a boss, and you might get a great job with a great title, et cetera, but that boss, if they're going to be in your way, then really you just, I don't know, it's something quite heartbreaking about being relegated down to being an individual contributor again, even though you bring in 30 years of experience. So.
As we close out, I want to ask one last question, which is, what if you're changing careers, you want to try something new, and you're willing to downshift.
Hmm.
How do you signal that in a way that people will listen and take seriously, and not just think, oh, this person is expensive and they come from a different field?
Yeah, I wonder whether it makes sense to touch on that very lightly. I probably,
Mm,
I don't know, if I put myself in that situation, I wonder if I would not want to potentially start from a place of, hey, I'm willing to kind of downshift, because that might send a message that your motivation isn't as much, or you're not as reliable. But I think it goes back to being adaptable.
mm,
I think it's the idea of saying, I've worked in different scenarios where I've led many people, and sometimes I was an individual contributor, and sometimes I was in the hottest part of my business, and sometimes I was in the slowest part. But I'm willing to roll up my sleeves and get involved. And more importantly, I'm also very eager to learn about
mhm,
how this culture and this business is evolving. So I think I would say having the adaptability and having a forward-looking perspective.
mm.
Always having a perspective on how am I going to contribute to where we're going, as opposed to kind of having to report to you that I did all these things, and therefore let's try to fit this square peg into a round hole. Let's look at this together and how we can actually team up for the future.
Yeah, and I have to say, as a dedicated pessimist, I think this is a situation where you want to convey optimism. You want to, I
Exactly.
mean, I love roll up your sleeves. Like that's such a great phrase. I'm a real roll up my sleeves kind of person that
Yeah.
conveys energy and enthusiasm and optimism. And I think that, you know, that is what you want to convey at any age. And when you're younger,
Mhm.
when you convey that, you can be taken a lot less seriously.
Yeah,
I
that's
used to be
true.
told all the time, "Oh, you're so passionate." And I
Yeah.
know that wasn't a compliment. Um, but as you get older, signaling that roll up your sleeves, I think is
Yeah.
really positive.
Yeah. Yeah, you might even say, "Look, I could look anywhere, but I really wanted to pinpoint this company because of what you're doing and how I feel it fits with my values and my work."
Yeah.
Um, like anything else, you wanna really show them that you value them as much as you're hoping they value you.
Okay, I do have one last question.
Yeah.
A lot of people I know in our age group, you know, they consult. They leave a corporate job at a certain level, then they use that great network, they consult for 8, 12 months, then they want to go back in.
Yeah.
How do you position that consulting period in a way that makes you stronger as an older candidate?
Yeah. I would say it's one, I think it's like, "Hey, I was willing to take a risk." You
Mm,
know? I was willing to go out there and bet on myself. And that means that I'm willing to deal with change. I'm willing to deal with the ups and downs of the economy, for
mhm,
instance. Uh, and like for instance, why I went into coaching and consulting was because I actually wanted to be of value to more than one party, basically. So the idea here is you could say, I went into consulting because I want to bring some expertise to a bigger audience. But having done that, and coming back to you, I'm able to bring in a perspective that's broader than your company. I have best practices that I've gathered from so many other clients in this industry or outside the industry that I can then bring in. Because remember, a lot of people who have worked in one company for many years, they are just by no mistake of their own, they're oblivious to really what's existing outside.
right.
But you're able to kind of bring that back into them and with a refreshing point of view.
Yes, and there is no better way than consulting
Yeah,
to really refresh and learn and go deep into companies you normally wouldn't have. So, yeah,
exactly.
awesome.
Well,
Thank you, my friend. Thank you, listeners
always.
and watchers, and we will talk in 2 weeks.
Thanks, Maura. See you later.
Bye.
Bye.